Ready. Ready. Ready.
Hello, welcome to Enlightning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with distinguished, illustrious, distinguished, talented, amazing architect at Red Hat, Andrew Block. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
No problem. Happy to do it. Hey, everyone.
And Andrew's also a maintainer on Helm. So, where are you right now, and what time is it presently?
That is an interesting question because I get that literally almost every day. Where
Yeah.
in the world is Andy? Today, I am coming to you from, I'll give you a hint, it's dark outside. So we're
Yeah.
definitely not on the North American side of that world. I'm over in Singapore right now.
Singapore. And what time is it?
It right now is top of the hour. It's midnight.
It's
So it's
tomorrow for you.
tomorrow.
You're living in the future. Yeah. So do you often do these, like, thank you, first of all, thank you so much for coming here so late, and for putting the wear and tear on your body to teach us Helm. And and then, is this a normal thing for you to do, like, these
Yes.
overnight kind of? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I
Uh-huh.
mean, time zones, as I always say, are relative. So
Uh-huh.
it's only where you think you are. That's why if you go to an airport and someone's drinking at 8 in the morning, it
Uh-huh.
may be
So
because
you're
their
just like
mind is not at 8 in the morning.
Well, do you love the travel life? Do you get tired? Do you yes and yes?
I am probably the opposite of, most people. Most people are like, oh, yeah, you must get tired. But the one thing I will say is when I go on vacation, I typically don't go anywhere exotic. I go to like friends and family and kind of just hang out because that for me is a vacation.
That's so like, what percentage of the time are you gone?
98%, like literally all the
98%.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you even, so I toured in a band for a year, and when I was gone that much, I was like, I don't even need to bother to have a place I called home. I put all my stuff into storage. I sold my car. I mean, money was, like, for a traveling musician, money's an issue, but
So
where do you
I
call
was
home? You
smart and I at least bought a house. So I'm not paying
okay?
rent on something I'm not there, but my house is in Chicago. So it will
Okay.
hopefully get some money out of it and accrue over time. But the reason
There
I
you
live in
go.
Chicago is one, because the weather, I know it's not the best sometimes, but summers are very nice and going over to Lake Michigan is amazing. And number
Uh-huh.
two, O'Hare International Airport is one of only 5 airports that
Ah.
connects every single continent. So I can get anywhere pretty easily.
Ah, so you're so committed to the travel lifestyle that the city you choose to live in is
I
yeah,
also just
enables you.
happen to I also happen to go to school there, so I just happen to stay there after school.
Oh, okay. So you've been there for a long time.
Yeah, I've been there for 16 years now.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah,
I think inertia is the reason I'm in Austin, Texas, too. It's
yeah.
until something makes it worthwhile to do all the work of moving. I'm planted right here. Yeah.
I moved literally 2 blocks away 6 years ago from where I was renting to where I live now, and that was a pain in the butt. I can't imagine moving further.
Yeah. Let's say hi to a couple folks. Lisa, hello, Lisa. Thank you always for being such a great supporter of the show. Good morning to you. And then Vice Spheric is here. Thanks so much for coming, Vice Spheric. Appreciate you. Um, so I'm gonna start like moving behind the light board. I have a thing that I want to plug about myself before we talk about how great you are. And actually, this is related. So I'm starting a second streaming show with Victor Farsick over on the DevOps Toolkit channel, and it is a choose your own adventure through the CNCF landscape. So it's kind of a wild concept where we hope to touch like every CNCF project. But in the short term, we're starting like slow and in a way that at least I can comprehend, where chapter 1, we're going to have episodes to talk about every step of getting an application from a developer's laptop to a production environment. So our very first episode was yesterday. And so we had 3 guests on, each representing a different CNCF project. And then those 3 guests each had only 5 minutes to tell about their project. So they really have to prioritize. I don't think I realized how hard it would be for them to keep within that 5-minute window to like, so they really have to prioritize like what is the core of their project. And then after the 3 guests give presentations, then we open it up to a Q&A and had a really great discussion about different build strategies. And currently there's a vote open, so you can watch the show and then you can vote, and then whatever technology gets chosen, we're going to build into an ongoing demo. So at the top of next week's show, which will be on Tuesday, we'll build out we'll implement whatever gets chosen. Right now, Cloud Native Build Packs is winning. And then we will open it up. We'll introduce new guests, and our guests for next week will be about container registries, different container registry choices. And we'll present on those, we'll have a discussion and then put it up for votes and then rinse and repeat. But at some point, like right now for the getting to the build environment, it's pretty like streamlined pipeline. But at some point, once we get into more complex technologies, the route we choose is going to lead to a different set of choices, like a different set of guests or technologies that we're going to be talking about. So it's going to, like a choose your own adventure book.
Have you seen the CNCF landscape recently? You're going to be on this for
like
a long time.
Years. And it's going to keep changing. Like since we've been doing this since the beginning of 2023, like together, just getting it all ready to go. And I think we've worked through about 20 projects and like 30 more have gotten added. So like we can't even keep up with the pace. Like we're not even.
You get the microscope out, you'll see every little one. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a reasonable chance we're gonna fail miserably at some point. We're just gonna, but I mean,
why wouldn't it not?
We're gonna work really hard, do our best, have fun, and you learn more from failing right than you do from getting it right.
Absolutely
correct. So we have a lot of friends. Here are some more friends. Sergey, thanks so much for coming. Glad to have you here. And then Christian. So glad to have you. Christian was our guest on Enlightning. He helped teach about Argo CD back in the day.
Christian's amazing. Hey, Christian.
Hi, Christian. I'm going to put a link for the first show in the chat right now. Spheric has requested one, but also I intended to do it. And then Christian's amazing. So glad to have you. And now that's enough about me. Started to dominate there for a while. Let's talk about you. Well, actually, while we talk about you, I'm going to move behind the light board. So I would love to hear from chat. Do you have experience using Helm? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? If you don't use Helm, what are you using as your package manager or to define your applications? Any other questions you want to ask chat? See what they have to say?
Honestly, asking them what tool they use. Do they use a tool at all? Because, and we'll get to that, really is, where did Helm come from? Why was it created? That's the most important thing. And then we'll kind of dive into all the different ways you can use Helm and all the different tools and technologies that have gone ahead and adopted it.
It's so exciting. And Andrew, you're going to be on the Choose Your Own Adventure show in a few weeks. Once we get to the step of defining and deploying an application to development, you're going to come on to represent Helm over there too. I plan to, hold court with all these different tools and give Helm all the representation it needs. I think I'm confident that you're going to be great for the job. When you tour all over everywhere, is Helm the main thing that you talk about? No, actually, I talk about a number of different things. Everything from one of the things I actually talk about more recently is security and software supply chain security.
I
Ah,
am a contributor to the SigStore project.
okay.
So it's an open SSF project. Really allows you to work on signing any type of content, either container images or anything, and a way to just secure the entire software supply chain.
Cool. Christian
Yeah.
has Christian has questions already. Is there plans in the future to making Helm charts easier?
So
And
there's
then he also mentions Go templates.
so he's hitting on a
Golang.
couple of different recent conversations that have been going on in the community
Uh huh.
regarding different tools that might be able to be integrated into the Helm stack to make life easier. We're going to talk about some of the tools right now that actually make Helm generation and usage easier during our show today. But also, as
Nice.
Christian mentioned, looking at other language frameworks and templating frameworks like Qlang
Mm-hmm.
to instead of Golang, which is right now the default language that's being
Excellent.
used.
I put some links in the chat. You have books, plural, that you've written. Will you
I
tell us
do.
about your books while I move behind the light board, please?
Absolutely. I have two
Thank
books
you.
that are out right now. One is the Managing Helm book, which is a follow up to the initial book I had that was about 3 years ago it came out. But this is a follow up that has a lot of new capabilities and advances. Back then, we ended up using Jenkins to deploy Helm charts, but now we're using Argo CD as the tool for
Ah,
implementing GitOps. Really, we had an initial CI/CD focus, which was more traditional, not necessarily as Kubernetes native, but now we're focusing more on the GitOps stack and leveraging tools like Argo CD to be able to roll out our Helm charts. The second book I
excellent.
have, it really just
Yeah.
kind of doubles down on my focus on security is managing Kubernetes secrets. So Kubernetes secrets, as you may or may not know, is not secure. By default, they are base 64 encoded. They're not encrypted in any form or another. So if you're using Kubernetes secrets, I highly recommend think about other ways that you can go ahead and secure using Kubernetes. We go through a number of different ways you can do that. Everything from how you store credentials securely within a Git repository, all the way through leveraging a vault solution to be able to store and then utilize those within your Kubernetes application. So really, we go through almost everything a developer and individual would need as they were going through the Kubernetes ecosystem. You can go ahead and secure etcd, the key value data store of Kubernetes. So
Andy, so I just got a message from StreamYard that I have to restart, but you should be able to hang out in here with everybody without me for
sounds
just a moment while I restart. But we have, I want to say hello to Kormaju. Thanks so much for coming. And Deshawn's here. Thank you, Deshawn. And then we have a question for you. How can you write books if you spend most of the time on planes? And
well,
I'm going to
actually, that
restart while you answer.
so as you can probably tell, I'm over in Singapore. This is not a unique thing. I am always on the move. I'm either going to be working with some of the customers I work with at Red Hat, or I go ahead and speak at various open source conferences to be able to talk about not only Helm, but also the software supply chain side of things. That does involve, global travel, and there's a lot of downtime. People, when they sit on planes, they will either do one of two things typically. They'll go ahead and they'll sleep, or they'll watch something on the screen. I like to use it as time to disconnect from the world and write anything. Traditionally, I had gone and just started writing blogs, but moved into the realm of I'm going to write some books because not only do I want to talk about a topic, but I kind of want to dive into a topic in further detail to promote the tool or concept so others can be more informed and then can basically do the train the trainer model type mentality, being able to then hopefully teach it to others who might want to learn about it. So that's how I'm going to spend the 17 and a half hours I am going to be spending on my flight tomorrow to San Francisco, and then to Chicago, and then actually, ironically, two more flights right after that down to Buenos Aires, Argentina. So it's going to be a very long day. But
That's wild and impressive to me that you're able to make your plane time into productive time.
It's nice. It's nice because many times they turn off the lights and encourage sleep, but I try not to sleep, so it's just quiet. Got the hum of the engines, and away you go.
and Jorge says that's why you rock, because you don't watch Netflix. You're not, or those the screens they put in the back of the chair ahead of you.
Exactly.
I turn those off, and some flights I have to turn them off like 10 different times. They keep
Yep.
wanting to pop back on. Yeah.
Yep. Anytime
You
they
have
make
to
an
be really
announcement, it
committed.
pops on. Yep.
Yeah, really committed not to watch any shows. So, you're saying you hear loud clicking. You know what? That could be my earrings hitting the my earbuds. I don't know why that would be a problem now, and it hasn't been in the past because I always wear those earrings. But did that fix it?
Yep.
That's
You're good right now.
an analog problem. Yeah.
In the world of
Excellent.
digital, it's impossible.
Oh, you can't see the screen on my glass. I have a polarizing filter. Y'all are getting the full experience of, yeah.
We're going behind the scenes.
Yeah. I wonder why it's so bad today. So that improved it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't see
If
anything.
you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't. Yeah. But now in the future, you're gonna see it all the time. Thank you so much, Kormaju, for letting me know about that.
So
yeah.
Lisa, you hit on an interesting topic. How do you manage adapting to different time zones? And do I require 5 or 6 hours of sleep? 5 or 6 hours. I wish I've gotten 5 or 6 hours. It's going to be probably about 4 because this stream's going to end at about 2, and I'm going to get up around 7 because I need to be in the office by 8:30 at the latest. So, yeah. Honestly, I have my own time. I try to adapt as best as possible to local time, but especially on tomorrow, I have to have a very elongated day. What I typically do is to adjust. You spread out your meals. Spread out your meals to where you're going to, because that kind of resets your body clock. That's the number one tip I'll give you. And also try to adjust your sleep schedule to your destination. So when I travel west, I just stay up the entire time. Like I'm going to Asia, I'm going to do my best to stay up the entire time, if possible. And then a lot of times, if you're coming from the United States and North America, you end up getting to Asia at night or later in the afternoon, evening. You just stay up the entire time. It's a very long day, but then you just crash when you hit the hotel, and then you wake up in the morning, and hey, you're on whatever time zone you're on.
Magic, so easy. So I'm going to bring us back to Helm, although like your travel life is pretty fascinating. So those of you who've been to the show before, you know I love to start with this opening question, which is like, what was the world like about when? Give me like a year-ish that before Helm existed, and then what was the world like that caused Helm to get created?
Simple.
Give me some context, please.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay.
So let's start when Kubernetes was first created back in 2015, 2016.
Okay.
You had to just define YAML. You have everything as single YAML objects. You have a service, you have a deployment. Actually, at that time, there really was not a deployment either. But that we're going way into the Wayback Machine, Mr. Peabody. You have all these different resources, but in Kubernetes, since everything is decentralized, there was no such concept of an application. So Kubernetes allowed you to take all those different piece parts and put it together into a single atomic unit, and then manage those resources as one in a way that modeled them very, very much like traditional package managers. Think of a package manager, one that you typically use every day. You're on Linux, you're going to use Yum or apt as your package manager. If you're on Windows, you might use Chocolatey. If you're on a Mac, you use Brew. So it tries to model itself very much like either one of those tools.
So the problem with everything being YAML was that it was difficult to manage all the separate files and how they coordinate with each other?
Exactly. Because think about it. You have all these different pieces. Every single one. You got a service. You got a deployment. You got a replica set. Or just pods. All these different pieces are all by themselves. But if I say I wanted to deploy an application of the best one is always WordPress. WordPress is the kind of the canonical, front end, back end type application. I got a front end web, web interface, and then I have a back end database. If I want to deploy that, what are all the pieces that I need? I'm going to need whatever it takes to deploy the back end, which is going to be, I need storage to be able to have the persistence to it. I then need to have a service for routing. When it was first created, there was no ingress, but let's just say today we have an ingress, and then we also have a deployment. That is our back end. But then we have our front end component, which is WordPress, which is really just a service and a deployment. But one of the cool parts about Helm is you are able to use dependencies. So we can go ahead and we can create a reusable component, which is basically the Postgres database, because for Postgres, you might want to use it in WordPress, but you might want to use it in a different thing. You might want to just create it standalone and then tie it to another web application or anything you need. So you can then manage multiple dependencies from your Helm chart.
So it's not just Kubernetes resources; it can be Kubernetes and third party.
No, it's always Kubernetes. These are Kubernetes resources. Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes.
Okay.
So Kubernetes is always a deployment target.
Okay. And then when you're talking about bringing in a database or coordinating with the database, how does that play in?
It's still a Kubernetes deployment. It's all being deployed to Kubernetes, but it is a separate deployment from whatever application you want to use, like WordPress or whatever you need. It's just a simple, Python or Node.js or TypeScript application.
And one thing I can see maybe Helm is helping with is, I know with Kubernetes, all the different resources can be dependent on one another. So you can't deploy, you need to make a namespace before you can deploy anything into the namespace.
Same thing with Helm. You need to be able to have a namespace available for Helm to be deployed to. Helm can include namespace resources, but there always needs to be a location where that chart,
the Helm instance,
the
needs
release.
To be.
Yeah, so basically when you install a Helm chart, it's called a release. So that release has to go somewhere.
So I guess my question is, does Helm help you install the Kubernetes resources in the correct order?
It can, yes. You can order it because there is a default ordering that Helm does create, because think about it. If you need to create certain things in certain orders, like if you include a namespace, it should probably go first.
Yeah,
So there is a default order that Helm does have, but then you can also create additional ordering as well through a concept called hooks. Hooks allow you to install resources at different phases. You can install things, which is really cool, because that basically allows you to have some sort of control over the resources that you are installing.
Okay, we have a question, and so this hooks thing and the term releases thing seem like things I want to write down, but I'm trying to get kind of a bigger picture before I just put down every little detail. But we do have a question from Kormaju. What's the difference between a container runtime like Containerd or Cryo and Helm?
So Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes. Cryo Containerd are the runtime. So a runtime is going to run a container image or an OCI, some OCI artifact, whether it be an image. So in most cases, it's going to be an image. It's going to be an OCI image. A Helm chart is going to contain Kubernetes resources. Those resources may or may not create container or deploy container images, because you can create a Helm chart that doesn't actually deploy a container image. You can just create a Helm chart full of configurations.
So a Helm release, I remember back in the Flux episode we had, I think it was Helm release, we had some confusion because they had a similar term.
They did.
For their own thing. That was, So do you think it would be worthwhile to go through some like vocabulary around Helm or some,
Yeah, absolutely. So we can go into, let's start at some primitives here. We'll go and start with primitives. What does a Helm chart consist of? A Helm chart consists of Kubernetes resources. Now, these resources themselves are templated resources. which means that you can, that's one of the best parts about Helm is you can inject parameters into those YAML. Think about YAML.
You're getting ahead of me. So what's
right.
in a Helm chart? First of all, before we say what is in a Helm chart, can we say what is a Helm chart?
A Helm chart basically is a directory. It's a directory full of content. And it was about as dumb as can be. But a Helm chart.
No, I love it. Yeah, I gotta
We'll
love the set here.
We'll start at the lowest level and work our way up.
Yeah.
So a Helm chart is just a composition of Kubernetes resources that are templated and a set of parameters. And those parameters are created within what they call value files.
Okay, so a Helm chart's a directory. It is filled with templated Kubernetes resources. So these are just like a Kubernetes deployment template that has no values in it whatsoever, just like any generic Kubernetes deployment.
It can be any Kubernetes resource. It's not just the deployment.
Yeah.
It's and all of these templated resources are located in a folder. So when we have that directory tree, inside that directory tree, at the top level, you have a folder called templates.
Cool. Templated. And are templates always Kubernetes resources?
Yes.
Okay.
Within that folder, so technically inside that folder, you can create, a set of reusable Golang functions. And we'll get to that a little later.
Okay. And then the values are for the templated resources. This
correct,
bookmarker's
and it's that combination of the two that go and get created as a release. But we'll get to that.
Okay. And then, so should I try to capture the release piece here, or we're going to talk?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
So think about this in your directory structure. So the directory structure, you have a Helm chart, and you do. So when you want to create, let's just start from in the beginning. If I want to create a Helm chart, I use the Helm CLI. So there's a CLI behind all of this to help make all of this happen. You can do it manually, but the CLI kind of helps you bootstrap it if you want.
Okay. Can y'all see this pink? I'm thinking of writing over it in orange.
You can see it, but it's a little hard.
I think today's stream is going to be in only green and orange. It's like you're just getting an insight into all these little considerations that I think about color a lot, and I never talk
green
about
and orange. I think you're going ahead and thinking ahead to Sunday, which is here in the U.S. Super Bowl Sunday. Green for the Philadelphia Eagles and orange for the Cincinnati Bengals.
I know so much nothing about sports that I didn't.
It's all subconscious.
All of that
somewhere, either you might have listened to it on TV. It's in your head.
Oh yeah. Well, it's the universe because I didn't choose for this pink not to work well. Okay, so we have a Helm chart, which is a directory, and then inside the Helm chart are templated, like generic Kubernetes resources, and then values for those templated resources that when combined make them not generic, they make them unique to your particular Helm release.
Correct. And that's the thing. So the templates directory is actually called templates. It has to be called templates. So all those resources have to be in that templates directory.
Okay.
And then the value file is in a file called values.yaml at the root directory structure.
Okay, gotcha.
And then there's also the metadata file. So there's a metadata file called chart.yaml that contains some basic information about the chart, what name it is, some information like the homepage for the chart, if there is one. It's going to contain what version of a Helm chart, because Helm is actually on version 3. So version 2, the big difference between the two is that Helm had previously a server-side component. And then very much like a GitOps tool, it would actually manage the deployment of the Helm chart. But now it's all just CLI-based.
Okay. Cool. So I have a metadata file. And what else is in a Helm chart?
That is, at a minimum, that's it.
Okay.
All I need to do is have a metadata file called chart.yaml, a values file called values.yaml, and a set of Kubernetes resources that are either templatized, they can just be raw manifests if you want, in a folder called templates.
Values.yaml.
Yep.
Then a folder called templates.
Yep.
A directory called templates. Cool.
Yeah. That's
Doing
it.
it. Yeah.
And then all you would need to do is use the Helm CLI to either run Helm install, give it a name. So when you want to go ahead and install a Helm chart, you use the Helm CLI. The Helm CLI is available on multiple operating systems via a million different package management tools of its own, or you can download it from the release page on GitHub. And you give the name a release name. I'm a little backwards there. And then you point at the directory that contains your Helm chart.
Right.
I guarantee we're gonna run out of space and we're gonna run out of topics. I guarantee it. We're not gonna run out of topics.
Okay. Well, I think maybe I think these basic things are really important, and then we can maybe not be as specific about the future stuff. But we have some questions for you.
Yes.
Why do we need a template format? Like, what does it contain?
Now, all Kubernetes resources need to be created as YAML. So they always need to be YAML files. They can be raw Kubernetes resources as you typically would create by themselves and just use kubectl create and apply. Or you can go ahead and create templated resources. These are templated resources using the Golang template language.
You use the Helm CLI to install the Helm chart, then that creates the running Kubernetes application, and that is called a release, a Helm release.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Now, remember, you don't have to have an application. It can just be random Kubernetes resources.
Okay. Yes, but they're grouped into whatever's into the chart.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I'm getting a nice picture. And Fuel Snobbles here. Hello, Fuel Snobble. Thanks for coming. I switched to the browse only subscription for Netflix. I don't know what that is. I don't know about Netflix or Super Bowls or anything. I'm kind of worthless when it comes to pop culture. That's because I spend all my time learning about CNCF projects, and that's only slightly a joke. Deshaun says it's
You're right.
Eagles in Kansas
It is
City.
Casey. And this is what happens when I travel so much. Thank you. Yes. So yes, it was. It's Casey. I'm sorry. So you got your red.
Okay, this is called a Helm release.
I'm sure everyone I know is from KC is now flooding my Twitter and my text messages. I'm sorry. It's only because my Buffalo Bills lost, a couple weeks ago.
I'm sorry I cannot participate in this banter. Good job, everyone. Way to play sports.
You're keeping us honest. See, that was intentional. Make sure you're paying attention.
And Java Grunt lives in Kansas City, so they're definitely cheer for KC. I enjoy Spectacle. There's a Netflix comment earlier, and I thought it was my witty hot take on it. Oh, okay. Got you. And then Eric Murphy's here. Hello, Eric. They have a question. Would you consider it best practice to deploy a microservice to Kubernetes with a Helm chart?
Now, that is an interesting question. When you say, is it a best practice to deploy using Helm? Well, I do not want to get into any holy wars. I like Helm. There are many other tools out there, CNCF projects that are there to also deploy Kubernetes applications, as we will talk in a few weeks to go have a battle of the trenches. I like Helm because it is very natural, it is traditional, and it honestly is fundamental. So,
and Helm, unlike some of the other tools, Helm is optimized for Kubernetes too.
Well, yeah, I mean, many of the other tools are designed for Kubernetes as well. However, it is just easy because a lot of different tools have support now for Kubernetes. We'll talk about some of those tools in a little bit. the ecosystem around Kubernetes and Helm is very vast, very, very vast.
Okay.
And if you want to go ahead and learn some more about that after our talk today, the last maintainer talk at KubeCon, we talked about some of that ecosystem. And as in a little bit of a hint, if you want to come to this year's KubeCon up in Amsterdam, we're going to talk about how you can start using Helm inside your own projects. So this is more from a developer standpoint, and you develop tools. How can you integrate into the Helm ecosystem?
Fuel Novel has a funny comment. It's too vast of an ecosystem around Kubernetes. They're just going to wait for the next big tech and then get on board with that from the start.
Yep.
Best of luck, Fuel Novel. All right. So I think, well, you tell me, do you feel like this is like the core of what a Helm chart is at the like baby base level?
It is a very minimal. Only thing we did not talk about is the Golang templates. We talked about the templates, but they are Golang based.
So these directory of templated Kubernetes resources are Golang based?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So they use the Golang template language to be able to be rendered. In addition, they also include some library functions from the Sprig framework, SPRIG. So it can do some cool functions like, uppercase and random numbers and, look at dictionaries and lists and transform resources.
Functions, DILN, Sprig. So what you're saying is these templates can incorporate logic.
Yes, you can add logic. And you can do conditionals, because right now, when you create Kubernetes manifests by default, just YAML. They're hard-coded. Not only can you inject values, but you can go ahead and transform how they are rendered themselves.
Excellent. I didn't know that about Helm. I'm learning.
Yeah,
learning so much already. And
that's
also just building
the goal.
A nice mental model. Yeah. Excellent.
So that, in a nutshell, is it. You can then use the Helm CLI to install the release to a Kubernetes cluster using the Helm install subcommand.
Great. So kind of using Eric Murphy's comments, their question about is it best practice to deploy a microservice. Can we go through like a concrete example of like what components make up a microservice and how would it look like if we were deploying that with Helm?
Yep, a very minimal microservice. You're going to have a deployment and you're going to have a service potentially.
Okay.
Or you can just have a deployment. A simple microservice is I have a deployment.
Okay, let's make it 2 resources to have a little teeny bit of complexity. So we have these 2 resources.
Let's do 2. We'll do a deployment and a config map.
Okay.
Config map allows us to have a little bit of configuration values to it.
Okay.
And Helm allows you to customize that config map with different data depending on what environment I'm in. Maybe I want to point to a URL that is our staging URL versus a prod URL.
So I have a question. So when I want in this case, a deployment and a config map template, are those template resources I'm creating, or are they like already made by the community and I'm using what already exists?
You would create your own.
Okay.
You might go ahead and leverage examples from the community to influence that, but they are your own resources.
Okay. So I'm creating templates for Kubernetes resources. I'm incorporating logic, but I'm not incorporating any specific values. Those come separately in the values file.
Correct. If you want.
Okay.
So you have to determine what kind of parameterization you want to apply. Is your container image in your deployment, that might have a different tag. I might have a staging tag for a staging environment. I might have a prod tag for a prod environment.
Okay.
And that's where the value files come in. The values.yaml that you have in your chart by default are defaults. You can inject either a different value file or at the command line, you can actually set the parameters themselves for each property.
Okay. So in the templates, I set default values, but then in the values file, I can set overwrites for those default values.
No. You
No.
basically create variables inside,
Okay.
your value files are your variables.
Mm-hmm.
You
Okay.
reference them in your templates, and then your defaults will have your default values, and then you can inject overrides. Yes.
Where do the defaults live? That's what I'm missing.
Values.yaml. Values.yaml.
Okay. Okay.
Yep, those are your
Excellent.
defaults, and then you can, as I said, either create separate value files, or
Uh-huh.
you can just add in each individual parameter as a command line argument.
Excellent. And we have a new buddy, Decred Hat. Thanks so much for coming. They love templates, and it seems like you have some DC Red Hat. That's what your name is, probably.
Yep.
Prod values, for example, dev values, for example.
Yep.
That's great. Default -values.yaml, maybe.
Well, remember, values.yaml is always the default. Those will always get used,
Okay.
even if you have overrides, because your overrides may only have a superset of all the values that are defined. So it uses the base and then overlays the ones that you put on top.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then Cormaggio has another great question. Can we run Ansible Playbook docker.yaml files? ?
You can use Ansible playbooks to install and manage Helm. Not sure with docker.yaml though. So Ansible Playbook content cannot be included. Like, you cannot include Ansible, tasks and different components inside a Helm chart.
Okay. And then one thing, like with Helm being a package manager, if you just want to consume an already existing application that's well known, then you can easily just import their Helm charts where they've already defined all of this stuff and consume it.
So that's the best part about Helm. Think about it. If you want to just get started with Helm, we didn't go into this yet, is you can share Helm content and then consume that content. It's one of the best things about a package manager. Think about YAML repositories. There are YAML repositories all over the place. You can go ahead and add that YAML repository and then install content from that repository. Same thing in Helm. You can add a Helm repository and then install a chart from that repository.
I'm going to capture that for sure.
Yep.
But I'm not sure if it's time yet. Nick, the first one's here. Hi, Nick, the first one. Haven't seen you in a hot minute. Thanks so much for coming. I could put that here, but I don't know if it's worth saving for later.
I would hold on to dependency management and how we share charts until a little later.
Okay, perfect.
So,
cool. I feel like I have a clear view of how this works. Thank you.
Good. Yep. So that gets us to step one. I have a Helm chart that is deployed to a Kubernetes environment because I ran Helm install. I pointed to I gave it a name. All releases have to have a name. You give it a name, and then you point to where that Helm chart exists, that directory. And then it installs the resources. But guess what? Over time, you might want to upgrade that Helm chart. Maybe you have a new tag for your image, for your application, because you have a V2 application. You can use the Helm upgrade command. So it allows you to then take an existing release and upgrade it to a new version or a new set of values.
Okay. Got you. That makes sense because you probably want to preserve an older state.
Yep, exactly.
In case you need to go back to it.
And you hit the nail on the head because you can roll back as well.
Yeah.
And it will basically allow you to do that. Now, it's interesting when you think about it, because how does Helm know what the current state of what is installed in your Kubernetes cluster? That release is actually stored by default within a Kubernetes secret. So it has all the information that was included inside that release that allows you to go front and back. So you can do the rollback, and it uses that information from there.
Does it only know the one rollback, or does it keep a longer path?
It allows you to keep history.
Okay.
And you can go ahead and remove it after a certain amount of time, so you don't have 30,000 updates.
Yeah.
By default, it will allow you to create as many as you want, but the goal would be to then just remove the older ones after some amount of time.
Yeah. Fuel Snobbles here with the comic relief. Did you hit the nail on its helm?
Ooh.
Thanks, Fields Novel. Yeah, so you were like, there's a Helm upgrade command, and then I thought, well, why wouldn't you just edit the YAML? And then I thought, yeah, you probably want to preserve the history. That's how that
Exactly.
train
Now,
of thought went.
what you do not want to do, and this is good GitOps methodology, because you look at tools like Argo and Flux, if you
Uh-huh.
edit it, it would then put it back to the state that you desire.
Yeah.
And once again, we will get into the tooling around Helm too, and where Helm is being used in various tools around GitOps. But that's a little later on.
So Kurmaju has some clarification around that question from earlier. Helm is an application definition and image build tool.
No,
Can I integrate?
Helm does not allow you to build images.
Yes, that's correct.
It
So
allows
can I
you
integrate?
it allows you to deploy Kubernetes resources.
So the definition part of that comment is correct. It does help you define your application,
Yeah,
but
so
it doesn't do the image building. You need something else for that.
Yep.
Fuel Snob was saying they used the chat GPT to come up with funny puns on the word Helm.
It's going to be better than anything I come up with, so you're good. You're good.
Sounds like Fuel Snob's one from their head was the best one anyway. Excellent. So we deployed it with install Helm Chart, and we can upgrade it with upgrade Helm Chart.
You can imagine if I don't want to have it available in the cluster anymore, I can uninstall it too, and that removes all the resources.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of fulfills the entire life cycle of I install, I upgrade, I roll back, I uninstall. That's in a nutshell.
Upgrade, rollback.
Yep.
Uninstall. Cool.
Yeah. So that, in a nutshell, is my Helm chart. But
we did it.
It's only the beginning. It is only the beginning.
We're going to keep doing it.
Yep.
We did do it. We will do it. We are doing it.
So let's talk a little bit about templates. Because that's where you'll spend most of your time working with Helm is how do I go ahead and inject parameterization into my Kubernetes resources?
Yes.
And the easiest is to use value files.
Mm-hmm.
And you store those values, in the values.yaml file or whatever you want. And then you want to be able to then use different type of Golang-based, the Golang template language. It itself is its own language, not tied to Helm at all. So the Golang actually has a templating language, and Sprig allows you to inject those functions. The cool part about it is very much like any programming language, you can create reusable functions in Helm called partials. So when you use the Helm create command, it has a boilerplate set of, or basically an archetype. So if you're familiar with like Maven, and you do Maven, Maven create, you can go ahead and get a basic, Java application that someone created. There is a default Helm project of Kubernetes resources. So
yeah, what's you help me with some of the takeaways of what you just said, what you want people to remember about Helm templates, that they you can incorporate conditionals and functions and programming logic.
Yep.
Yes.
You can create reusable functions itself. So some of the default ones that come out of the box when you use the Helm create command is it will allow you to inject what the name of your release, what your chart should be called. Like what you typically would apply to most of your Kubernetes resources is I'm going to give your service and your, let's say, deployment the same name. So instead of having to go in and use the same logic over and over, you can go ahead and create a reusable function that defines what the name of the chart is, or what the name of the deployment of the service is.
Nice.
And you can do even more complex things around how do I determine what image repository it comes from? How do I determine what, you can use more complex logic that you don't want to put inside each individual template values. You can go ahead and create partials. And these partials are actually created in separate files called helpers. So any file that begins with an underscore is a partial, can contain partial resources.
So these reusable functions you're telling us about are called partials.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then once you make a partial, can you use it across Helm charts?
You can use it. So technically, yes, because there are two types of Helm charts. There is what most will use it for as an application chart, but you can create a library chart. A library chart allows you to create basically a Helm chart full of partials. And then you can reference those partials in charts that use that library chart as a dependency. And that's another big word there, where you have dependencies where you can bring in charts and use charts.
So we're talking about dependencies to your Helm chart, not like your application dependencies.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, think about this. When we talked about our initial example of WordPress, Postgres, the database was the dependency of the WordPress chart. And you can go ahead and influence the configuration of that dependency too, because you might say, I want to go ahead and I want to create a database, but assign it a certain amount of persistent storage because it may include persistent volume claim. You can inject those as parameters for that underlying dependency chart.
Gotcha.
Yep.
We have a comment from DC Red Hat. I like how you can enforce YAML identification rules in the charts too. Indentation.
Indentation, yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry about spacing, and that's great. Escaping.
And I mean, that's what it is. And it actually comes from the Sprig programming language. There's a way that you can take YAML content and ensure that it gets indented a certain number of characters. And we're not going into the whole tabs and spaces debate. No, we don't have enough time for that.
You do want to sleep some amount tonight.
How many of you like tabs? How many of you like spaces?
Wait, you just said no, and then you asked the question.
I know. I want to go ahead and I want to find out.
So what do we want to remember about partials? That they can be factored into libraries?
They can be included within library charts, but they can also be included within normal application charts.
Okay. Never tabs. We got an
never tabs.
Yeah. Or library charts. Okay.
So that basically is another way that you can add. Really, the value of Helm is these dynamic reusability of all of these different components, being able to create dynamic content and reuse them across your different Kubernetes resources within your chart.
That's great.
So we've talked about the full life cycle of a Helm chart, but there is a need for sharing. Sharing is caring. You might have multiple teams that want to leverage the same chart. Why have them create their own? Why not go ahead and make it available more holistically for multiple individuals to use? And that's where you can go ahead and package up your chart and then publish it and make it available for others to consume.
Sharing is caring.
Sharing is caring.
Charts, yeah. You can package. So this is the package manager part we're talking about up top. You can
not quite, because Helm itself is just a Helm chart itself is a package, but to formally package it up, and basically that what it does is it will go ahead and create a compressed artifact, a tar.gz file, a TGZ file by default that use the Helm package command, and all it will do is basically just zip it up.
I like how I wrote out the words creates a compressed artifact when I just needed to write zip it. Zip it.
Even though it doesn't actually create a zip because zip is another format, but yada, yada, yada.
Oh, it's so tech. Okay.
I know.
So you package your chart and share it, and it creates a compressed artifact. So this is feeling like containery. So then, like, so then it sounds like, I'm guessing from my container knowledge, that you could probably like share it internally with like an internal like Helm registry, or you could share it publicly.
So Helm by default does not include a registry.
Okay.
The way you share content traditionally is that you will create. There is what they call a Helm repository. Now, a Helm repository is basically just any content that is hosted on an HTTP server. That's all it is.
Wow.
So
So
you have to host the content somewhere. So to host content and create a Helm repository, use the Helm index command. Pardon me. Oh my goodness, it is a day. Give me 1 second.
Today is the day.
The Helm repo index command, which basically allows you to create a Helm repository. And what it will do is it will spit out a index.yaml file, and that contains it's a metadata file containing all the different Helm content that's stored within a Helm repository. And then Helm repository literally is just all your Helm charts and the index.yaml file. That's all it is. You just need to host it somewhere.
Okay, so that, because many Helm charts need to, I'm thinking organization-wide, it doesn't make sense to spit out a whole new YAML file if you're like a whole new index.yaml every time you want to change any Helm chart. That's why I'm making a face. That's how it's done.
Do it. That's how it's done. But what you can do is you can take an existing and then just update it. And the tooling will allow you to do that.
Okay. And then this might be a silly question.
Yeah.
But this creates an artifact. Could you just, like, your zipped file, it's not zipped, it's tarred.
.tgz.
That compressed file, that artifact, could you just treat it like you do other artifacts, like a container, like a jar, or like a like in an artifact manager?
You could just add it as a file, and many artifact managers like Artifactory actually now contain support for Helm.
Okay.
So it can help abstract a lot of the process for you. But traditionally, with no additional tooling, you need to install two things. You need to install the index.yaml file and the chart to that to that repository, to that host, that server.
Okay. So which part of that should I capture on here?
So you need to create. So I would capture the compressed file and the index.yaml. Those are the two things that you need for a Helm repository.
And then will you restate, please, what the index.yaml file is?
It is a metadata of all the content that's in the repository.
Okay.
And as they say, a comment in chat would be, why change from tar? Tar files are so old, 1970s. However, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
And then we do have a question. Can you talk a little bit about Chart Museum versus OCI Index?
So Chart Museum itself is a project that allows you to host Helm repositories. So it itself is basically a HTTP server that abstracts the process for hosting and managing and searching Helm content. It's your own Helm content. So you can add it adds a nice web user interface to the management of Helm charts in repositories.
So we're talking too here about sharing is caring. You're sharing your own application.
You're sharing your Helm charts. You're sharing your Helm charts. Yep.
Yeah, your own Helm charts. And so how is if I consume a Helm chart for a well-known technology, what am I consuming? And
You're
from where?
consuming. You have to when you consume. Now, there are two ways to consume Helm charts. We're going to start with the traditional Helm repository first, and that's
Okay.
going to be when you consume a Helm chart in a remote repository, you have to first add that repository. By adding that repository, you give it a URL to where that content is stored. What the Helm tool will do is go to the location that you pointed to, you told Helm to add, and it looks for a file called index.yaml file. And then inside that contains the metadata of all the charts that are contained within that repository.
And
So,
then and that's displayed to you, and then at that point
it abstracts it. So it goes ahead and it will read and interpret that metadata file and know what charts are available. And then you can look and determine what charts are available to then install. Think about Helm, Helm, repo, search. Search a Helm, a Yum repository. Same thing with Helm. You can use the Helm search command.
once you install.
Once you go ahead and you add the repository, you have to add the repository first,
Okay.
and then you install the Helm chart from
that. After you add the repository, then you can search the repository.
Yep.
And then you can install from the repository.
You don't need to search. It's obviously optional. If you know the name of it, you can just go ahead and install it.
Okay. Okay. I'm getting a clear picture. Thank you.
No problem. Hopefully everyone in the audience is doing the same thing too.
Okay. So the way we consume from a traditional Helm repo is to add the repo, which is that index.yaml.
No, you don't have to worry about the index.yaml. That the Helm CLI manages that for you. You just give it the URL of the repository itself. And within that destination is actually the index.yaml. So everyone who's gone ahead and done a Helm repo add, if you go into that URL and then just do /index.yaml, you can see the metadata file.
Cool. And then so this is a traditional Helm repo. That implies that there's a non-traditional Helm repo.
There's the newer type of consuming content. You can use, now if you're familiar with image registries, container registries, there's the OCI format, the Open Container Initiative. You traditionally have container images, but you can store artifacts. Helm charts can be stored as OCI artifacts alongside the container image in one of those container repositories. You said you recently had a battle of all the different container registries. Same thing. You can.
Next week is the battle of the container registries.
Now most, if not, I think all the major repositories now or registries now contain support for artifacts. Docker Hub was one of the last holdouts. They recently added support for artifacts. So Helm charts can be stored as artifacts within OCI registries. So you can just go ahead and consume it like a container.
Excellent. I don't think I'm saying this right. Helm charts can be stored as OCI because the Helm chart itself is OCI compliant now.
Correct. When you use the Helm, you can use the Helm push command, and it basically takes a packaged Helm chart and pushes it as an OCI artifact and stores it within that repository. So you know how you use Docker build to create a container image or Podman build? You can go ahead and use Helm package. It creates that artifact, that atomic unit, and then you can use Helm push or Docker push or Podman push, and then that pushes it to your OCI artifact, or our OCI registry, pardon me.
Cool. How new is this?
OCI support was just GA'd. It was experimental in pre-release for like 2 years. It just went ahead and got GA'd in 3.8, which is I think last March or so. Actually, one of the primary technologies that I was focused on. I've been focusing on OCI integration with Helm
Cool.
because of a lot of the synergies between the secure software supply chain that I've been focusing on that we talked about earlier.
So
How many of you have used OCI Helm Chart based charts? Say in the chat. Let's get some input on what's going on. You guys using it? Not using it?
yeah, or Z4CE, Zace maybe. Have you used it before, or what do you know about it? Yeah, they've used
Yep.
it before.
Yep.
Me.
Me.
Yeah. And what do you think of it? Are you happy with it? What was the question? Oh yeah.
Question: Are you consuming Helm charts from OCI registries? Pardon me.
Java Grunt says they have not used it yet. Yet being the word.
Got a lot of good ideas coming down the pipe with OCI support. So, if you have any comments, feedback, we want to hear about it in the project.
Zay says it's a better way now that you don't have to set environment flags to enable it.
Yeah, you used to have to set an environment variable that allowed experimental mode, and since it's now GA, you don't have to include that anymore.
You're just acknowledging that you're on the bleeding edge with that flag.
Yep. You're no longer going without roads. There are no roads. You have now roads underneath you.
Epic Tracklala is saying that they use Artifactory. Is Artifactory an OCI artifact store?
It can.
Compliant?
So it can include support for acting as an OCI registry. It is an artifact store, and it supports everything from like Java Maven packages, NPM packages, Python pip packages, but it also supports acting as an OCI registry.
Cool.
Yeah.
How are we doing on real estate?
What do you mean? We got half of the stream left.
Yeah,
good.
Feeling
We
good.
We learned a lot.
Oh yeah.
We're doing good. We got a little more room.
Cool. I'm just saying, you see the whole picture. You know the amount that's still coming down the pipeline, and whether I need to be conservative or yeah.
As they say, if we want to go through everything of Helm, you're gonna need a bigger boat. You're gonna definitely need a bigger boat.
Get my second light board out.
Yeah, exactly.
Roll it over.
So that gets us into dependency management. Let's talk about some of the newer technologies into Kubernetes, and we'll talk about GitOps. Because GitOps, you mentioned Flux earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about how Helm is being used in various tools in the GitOps space.
Okay.
Two proper tools, or two of the most popular tools out there for GitOps is Flux and Argo CD.
Mm-hmm.
And they both contain support for consuming and deploying and managing Helm charts as ways of managing content within a GitOps paradigm and using GitOps methodologies.
Mm-hmm. We have a question. Can we monitor Helm chart while running, and how to fix the failed charts? Any suggestion?
So the Helm chart doesn't include an API itself. You can use the Helm CLI to be able to integrate with, but there are a number of different tools that expose the content of existing chart releases. I work at Red Hat, and our Kubernetes distribution is OpenShift, and we have a user interface that provides support around viewing and managing Helm charts. There are a number of other ones out there too, as well. I know that SUSE has support for it. I'm sure VMware also has some in the Tanzu ecosystem too. So most major modern distributions of Kubernetes now include support for Helm in the way to manage content.
Excellent.
So that is a good way to manage whether a chart has failed or has succeeded, and what the values are. Because you can go ahead and use the Helm show values command to be able to look at values that or look at releases that are already available in Kubernetes. Because you may say, "Oh, I installed that chart yesterday. What were the values I used?" You can go ahead and use that to find out more information about it.
I imagine too, if you have conditionals and like the way this is set up,
Yep.
you have a guess of what's deployed, but you need a way to actually see like what actually is running, what's it all got assembled and reconciled
Yep,
into
and you
a
can use the
resource.
Helm show all, and that will show all the content.
Nice.
It's part of a release. Yeah, it's really cool. And you can go and say, I only care about the values. I only care about what the chart YAML file is. You can go ahead and break it down as much as possible. And a lot of the tools, we mentioned, like Flux and Argo. A lot of them are building upon the SDK. There's an SDK that comes included with Helm to allow all these different integrations to easily consume and integrate with the Helm ecosystem.
So what does the feeling of interacting with that SDK?
It allows you to manage content. So I can go ahead and use it to install a Helm chart. I can use it to uninstall a Helm chart. I can go ahead and consume it to look at what Helm charts are deployed, are available, integrate with that, add a remote repository. Basically, almost everything the CLI does, it uses its own SDK.
Cool.
It also uses its own internal SDK, but there's a publicly available one too.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there more that we want to say about Helm and GitOps besides the fact that both Flux and Argo CD take it very seriously and integrate well with Helm?
The big difference between the two, and this is one that we need to get more support on, is that Flux allows you to leverage a concept in Helm called lookups. What you can do is, by default, Helm in certain ways does not require the use of a Kubernetes cluster. If you want to look at the rendering of a Helm chart without even touching a Kubernetes cluster, you can use the Helm template command. Now, there is a function, remember we mentioned Sprig functions previously?
Yes.
There's a function in Helm called lookup, where it allows you to look up values in an existing Kubernetes cluster. Because you might want to take the values that are there from another resource and incorporate it into your application. Let's say there's an existing database not related to Helm, to anything you're installing, but you want to integrate with it. You might want to look up some parameters or some resources that are associated to that existing Kubernetes resource. The difference is that Helm function lookup is only used when you communicate with a Kubernetes cluster. So when you use the Helm template command, you do not communicate with the Kubernetes cluster. So you cannot use lookup when using the Helm template command. Argo, by default, uses the Helm template command. So you cannot use lookup in Argo. However, in Flux, they use different APIs in different ways of managing a chart. You can use the lookup command.
So when you are creating your Helm templates, you can use that lookup command to have further ways you can dynamically configure what's
exactly. It can do it. It can go ahead and actually retrieve content from from a destination Kubernetes cluster that you're going to communicate with, and then go ahead and based on that content, it can get injected, or you can perform conditional logic based upon it.
And then Flux can also do the template commands that Argo can do, but Flux also has this extra superpower.
No, the challenge is the lookup command cannot be used when using Helm template. So if you're using Argo and you have lookups, it won't actually communicate to a Kubernetes cluster, and you'll just get blanks because it doesn't communicate.
Flux, I guess I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to get at and ask more nicely, but I'm just going to be crass. Is this make Flux better than Argo CD in this way, or does Argo CD have like a different experience, or just no experience that's related?
It is challenged. I love
Okay.
Argo. I love Flux. This is one
Uh-huh.
where Flux has a clear advantage.
Flux has a win on this one.
Yep.
Yeah. Plus in the
And
Flux
trust
column.
me, it's been a topic of conversation in the Argo community for a while, and I've actually been part of some of those conversations to see how we can actually make it better, because we want to get the tools in the Kubernetes ecosystem to be as powerful as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I do want to so I think we're in a good spot when it comes to Helm and GitOps.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take a step back, actually, if possible. Is that okay?
Of course.
All right. So we talked about values. So Helm does include a number of included functions, not only functions, but included properties that you can reference in your templates. Values is one of them. So taking a step back, if I want to talk, if I want to go ahead and reference inside my templates, what format does it look like? So what does the actual parameterization look like of the actual values that you want, or the actual dynamic content you want to include? So you know how in like Bash you have a $sign and then you go ahead and put the variable. In Helm, you encapsulate your variable within 2 squiggly braces on each side.
Okay. Oh, so that's what someone did that in the comments when they said
I wanted to kind of double back on that.
Yeah. Okay, let's DC Red Hat said I love templates. So that's how templates
That's the format. Exactly. So let's go ahead and let's break that down.
So that's how variables are denoted in a template.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
And the first thing you need to do is you need to look at, okay, how do I get access to my values? Any guess?
How
do I actually access values from
in the values.yaml? But
right, but within a template file, within the template file, you have these variables. How do you actually reference the appropriate variable?
Well, it seems like you would have to be able to in your template file, you'd have to reference the particular value file that you want to use, right?
Not the value file, not the file, because what Helm will do is it'll take all the value files you give it in parameters and basically merge it together into a top-level value. So if you want to go ahead, exactly. So inside the curly braces, you do dot values, capital V, and that gives you access to all the values that you have available. And then you do dot values dot blank, whatever content inside the values.
Okay.
However, it is not the only property you can reference. You can reference information about the release. So you can go ahead and inject release information, like what is the name of my release? Or you can look at actual capabilities of your Kubernetes cluster. What version of Kubernetes are you running? You can use the .capabilities property. So all these different properties you can inject into your Kubernetes, into your templated values.
Okay.
And then most important, I guess, use capabilities when using dynamic logic. So one of the best examples is like an ingress resource. Before Kubernetes, I honestly don't even remember the version offhand, but it had a different API group. So depending on whatever Kubernetes version you wanted to install your chart into, you had to install or use the appropriate Kubernetes API group.
Template.
So these are all part of these built-in objects. So the built-in objects are really release that contains information about the release, values, and then capabilities.
Release.
Yep.
Where does lookups fit in?
Those are functions. It's a function.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that's similar to like we talked about earlier, where we could format YAML. We can go ahead and capitalize words. Those are different functions, either coming from the Sprig language or some Helm specific ones.
Values, access to the values defined in the values. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the wonderful department of redundancy. We love it.
Okay. And what was the third one, please?
Capabilities.
And remind me what that is, please.
That allows us to look at different information about the Kubernetes cluster you're deploying into.
Mm.
There is one more if you want.
All right.
And that is,
Injected. Wow.
yeah, inject information about the Kubernetes cluster you're deploying to.
And one more. Okay.
Yep. Files allows you to access additional files that are located inside your Helm chart. You can have additional resources that are available inside your Helm charts.
Files. So in your Helm chart, you make like a files directory, and then
You can create by default, by the convention, you can create a files directory, but it's not mandatory. A template folder is mandatory. Everything else is up to you. There's convention that says throw it into a files folder, but by default, it doesn't have to be in there because all you will do is you'll just reference the path of where that is located inside your chart.
Can access arbitrary files in your chart.
Yep, exactly. A good example of that, of using the files built-in object, is if you want to inject the content of a file inside a config map. So a good example, in a Java application, you might want to be able to, might want to inject a properties file. Yeah. You might have a dev properties for like a Spring Boot or a Quarkus application.
Okay, makes a lot of sense.
And based upon what environment you have it and what values you add, you can then determine and load in a specific file.
Cool. This is exciting.
We're going down the rabbit hole.
I'm enjoying it. This is fun. I kind of know what Helm is. Like I've always kind of known what Helm is, but like this is really giving life to it, and I'm really enjoying this time with you right now, Andrew.
Good.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we're also opening up the world for everyone else too.
Yeah. All right. I left this little room for my head. So I and I'll stay out here while I still can.
You fit in just nicely. Perfect.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about Helm values. We talked about Helm templates. How do we we talk, these are the Helm values are just YAML files. But
yeah.
How do we know what should be included inside those Helm value files? i.e., you can actually put a schema behind those value files. So you can go ahead and enforce some actual schema mechanisms to say, I always need to have, my values need to always be integers. So let's say I have a property, it needs to always be integers, or it always needs to be a date, or it has a minimum and maximum. Helm makes use of the JSON schema language. So you can add basically additional validation logic. Yes.
Is the schema only for the values.yaml file?
Yes. It's just for value file. File.
Okay.
Because values, when you think about it, is one of probably the two basic primitives of Helm.
Okay.
You have templated resources and values. And the schema file itself is in very much like convention is as part of a known convention. So it has to be called a certain name. Very much like values.yaml. It has a name itself.
The schema has a name.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's in a file called values.schema.json. At the top level of your Helm chart. Yep.
And so that can help you enforce
validation,
with
validation,
validation?
validation, because it says because you can by default add in arbitrary content
Uh-huh.
for values. I can say image.registry equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that probably isn't correct. You can enforce that there's no numbers, or you can go ahead and enforce, like if you want to have a tag, you may have a tag that has a certain format, v1.x or vx.x. You can enforce that all via JSON schema.
Amazing. Cool.
Next, we're going to talk about CI, continuous integration. How do I actually, enforce CI around my Helm charts? There's tools for it, because like every developer, you want to add tests to validate that your content is sufficient. There is a great tool called Chart Tester that allows you to do two key functions. It allows you to lint your chart for syntax management, as well as test your chart, i.e. it will go ahead and deploy it to a Kubernetes cluster.
Okay. What is the object that can lint and test your chart, please? You're a little bit.
Chart testing is the name of the tool.
Okay.
It is not built in. It is part of the Helm organization within GitHub, but it is not part of the Helm, project itself. It is an additional tool to help with Helm.
So you can lint and test your chart.
Yep. And testing basically will install it to a Kubernetes cluster and validate that it will deploy.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really cool. You can put that into a CI pipeline and integrate that in. Now, if we're looking at like a pipeline in GitHub, GitLab, Tekton, you're going to typically have chart tester to test it. You then probably want to have chart releaser. Chart releaser will help you go ahead and release your chart to, now remember we mentioned how Helm repositories are just content stored in HTTP servers, remember?
Yes.
Well, what is another good use of, or good example of an HTTP server in the cloud native ecosystem? GitHub Pages.
I don't know about GitHub Pages. Yeah.
Oh yeah, GitHub Pages allows you to basically create web pages in Git repositories.
Cool.
So you can use that as chart storage for chart repositories.
Ah.
So this other tool called Chart Releaser will do is it will basically allow you to package up the chart and release it within GitHub Pages. You'll basically perform Helm package and then Helm repo index, and then publish that content and commit that content automatically to GitHub Pages, and then make that content available. By making the content available, it then just basically makes the repository available.
So how's the user experience different with the chart releaser than it would be to just release it vanilla Helm?
How would the Google
like the user experience? Like if you're a Helm user and you want to share a chart, how's it what's the experience like if you just do it regular?
If you do it regular, you're doing everything manually.
So you're getting that index.yaml and sending to someone else.
You're basically abstracting all those manual commands and having the tool do it for you. It's going in and running Helm index, Helm repo index. It's then going ahead and committing the code for you. It's going ahead and talking to the GitHub APIs and releasing the content.
Okay, so it's taking it has an opinion about where it goes, but then it's doing all the steps for you.
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
And by talking
here.
Hello, and by talking to the GitHub API, it's just abstracting and simplifying everything.
Cool. Yes. But then it has opinions about where it goes, which is like always the trade-off, right?
Well, exactly. It'll always create a GitHub release. So it creates the release, and then you can determine if you want to actually publish that or not in a repository.
Okay.
So it's simplifying the entire distribution of your Helm charts.
Cool.
Yeah. We're running out of real estate. What else do we
Uh-huh.
want? Well,
Yeah, what's
now,
the most important stuff? What's left?
yeah, so I mean, that in a nutshell is the Helm ecosystem. In a nutshell.
Amazing. Cool. So I actually have all this room to stand in. Let's if this is everything you want to say, what I want to do is kind of go through and like maybe make a takeaways, like here are some high level benefits of
Yep.
using Helm.
Yep.
Cool. So here's that.
I always like to ask the audience: is there anything out there that in the Helm ecosystem that our audience wants us to cover?
Yep, that's a perfect question. And Napalm has a new job, and I've started to use this stuff now. My new role is doing Kubernetes stuff on OCP. That's amazing. So OpenShift Container Platform is OCP,
Yep.
and yeah, Napalm's been hanging out more as like a .NET developer. Yeah.
Oh,
and now,
.NET.
And yeah, but then supporting the show, and now actually it's becoming relevant. So that's amazing.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
So while we wait for questions to roll in, let's work on our benefits, or like our recap, our benefits
Yep.
of Helm.
Yep.
So like, we're just gonna.
Yep. So Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes. That itself is your 100,000-foot view. It includes two primary components. Helm parameters stored in value files, and allows you to inject those into Helm templated Kubernetes resources.
Mm-hmm.
The combination of those two are included into what is called a Helm release, as deployed within a Kubernetes environment.
It's excellent. What do you know? What I want to talk about a little bit,
Yeah.
is consuming Helm charts that already have been made of like of a Kubernetes instance of a certain, I don't know, Redis or something.
Yeah.
What's that look and feel like?
That is going to be you first have to, so if we're using traditional Helm repositories, you have to first add the repository, and then you can install, and that goes into our 1, 2, 3 over there in the middle.
Yeah.
That's how you consume a traditional Helm repository.
Okay.
A Helm chart stored in a Helm repository.
So this could be this Helm repo could be a private or public. Like it could be something like you want a microservice that sits next to your microservice, so you want to install their stuff to make sure you integrate well.
Yep.
You could do that with this, but also if you want a Redis database, you could do that this way too. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
The other way to do it is using the OCI chart storage. You don't need to add a repository. You can just go ahead and use the Helm install command and then reference the location of that chart inside the OCI registry.
Cool.
That's it. You get some additional bonuses of not having to add a repository. You can just install it directly. The only downside right now is there's no way to search a Helm content inside an OCI registry. So
and we have a question from Napalm. Operators are the next evolution of Helm, but easier to use. Hot take. So is that a question or a statement?
Let's say a statement. I can't tell.
Are operators and Helm competing forces, or can they be used together?
Both. They are different ways of deploying and managing Kubernetes resources. An operator can actually, like using the operator framework, basically be packaged as a Helm chart can be packaged within an operator, and the operator can then deploy a Kubernetes resource. Think of it very much like GitOps. It's going ahead and basically deploying a Kubernetes resource, a Helm chart. Same thing.
Okay.
But a operator, by definition, always has a custom resource associated to it, by definition.
Okay.
So it always listens against a custom resource definition. So I might have my awesome Helm chart custom resource definition. And then based upon that, the definition of that content, it will go ahead and render a Kubernetes release based on the content within that custom resource definition. And that gets injected as those values.
Can't you also, so I guess just like anything, you could define it vanilla Kubernetes, like the vanilla custom resource definition. But what Helm gives you is the ability to have the dynamic.
A custom resource definition needs to have something that realizes something. All you're doing is you're adding a YAML file. That YAML file needs to have some substance, and that's what an operator will do. Is it will allow you to basically go in and have something listen for that custom resource and realize some sort of content based upon the values of that custom resource.
An operator is like a controller for a specific resource.
It is a controller, exactly. Kubernetes includes a number of default controllers, one for deployments, one for replica sets, one for daemon sets, you name it. A operator is basically a controller that is tied to a specific custom resource.
And what value does Helm bring to using using Helm to deploy your operator, your controller?
All the way around. In most cases, I mean, you can use Helm to deploy operators. You can then use operators to deploy Helm or be packaged in Helm Chart. They can actually be used interchangeably.
Okay. So what value? What? So you would use an operator then to deploy your Helm. So the operator's watching Helm to make sure the state that you defined is
the operator is
happening.
watching custom resources, and based upon the definition of that custom resource, the operator will then use the Helm SDK to then install the Helm chart that it is part of it.
Okay.
You're gonna have basically an operator that's gonna basically be used to install a Helm chart.
Okay, and that's what Epic Tralala says they install. Wait, they install their operators with Helm, not the way you just said it, but the other way.
You can do it both ways. You can do it, as I said, you can install your operators from Helm. You can also use a operator to instantiate the Helm chart.
And why do you want to do that?
Because a lot of individuals love the whole operator concept, to be able to manage everything. So you keep everything in the same family of managing content. I use Helm traditionally to deploy my operators. I have used Helm operators in the past, but I traditionally just use Helm to deploy my operators that are traditionally Golang based. You can also use Ansible based operators too. The operator framework has support for Ansible too. And there's also, and that all uses the Cube Builder project under the covers.
And Napalm has a question. So an operator fills in the Helm template in this scenario?
It provides the values and then uses the value, and it basically has the values because the custom resource will have the overriding values for the Helm chart. So if I had a Helm chart that had a default value of 5 for a parameter called image, I can or that's a bad one. Replicas. There you go. Great example. I can go ahead and say, okay, I don't want 5 by default. I want 2. My custom resource will have a property called max value or replicas, pardon me. And then the operator itself will go ahead, take that, and use that when it's installing the Helm chart.
Zay says, I think a major benefit of using Helm versus operators is that every new operator requires understanding whatever conceptual model the operator designer has created versus having a consistent framework of how things are defined with Helm.
That's right.
That's a great point.
Because you have a custom resource, and that custom resource is going to be very different for every single application. A value file is, well, I said we'll still have different values. You do at least know the structure of, it's YAML based, it's going to be in a certain convention. But both have support for schemas. Both have, one has Open API support, that's the custom resource definition, and Helm has JSON support, JSON schema support.
Vice says, great stream, gotta go, but before I do, the job manager said, thought Kate's was at the Helm today. Operator, no, we're waiting for the new temp, but they're always running late. Vice is always with the puns.
With the puns, punny.
Yes, Epic Tralala says Argo CD is deploying their Helm charts, and now finally with Git values.
Yep. So you can
I
go
don't
ahead.
know Git values.
So you can go ahead and consume Helm charts that are stored within Git repositories. Basically, it's very much just a flat directory structure. You're just referencing a Git repository, and then within that, you're just referencing a directory. Very much when you created Helm create, and you had that directory of templates and values. You're just referencing that in a Git repository, versus you can just use a traditional Helm repository too, all within Argo CD. Same thing with Flux.
So our benefits of Helm. So we talked about how it worked, and you've even recapped this part, so I won't recap it. But then the benefits of Helm, I think, partly is being able to add the dynamic into the dynamic functions into how your Kubernetes resources are defined.
It's really twofold. One, just encapsulating all the Kubernetes resources in general into an atomic unit as a Helm chart. And the added benefit on top of that is the dynamic capabilities that are provided by values and templates.
So encapsulating all necessary Kate's resources. Man, this is wordy. And into one chart, into one place.
Into one atomic unit, an atomic unit.
One unit. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
And then the second part is like adding the
parameterization,
part.
the dynamic capabilities, exactly. And then the third one is being able to then obviously share the charts with others and be able to consume it. Because in most cases, the majority of users of Helm are never creating a chart. They're just consuming it.
Yeah. So, and that even goes with the Helm has been around for a long time and has a pretty amazing ecosystem.
It's got a massive ecosystem.
Yeah.
So many different vendors have deployed and made their software available as Helm charts to simplify how they're being used in Kubernetes. I work with many partners who deploy applications in Kubernetes. It's obviously a whole bunch of them are using operators, but Helm, is a primary vehicle for deploying their containers.
Cool. So I'd say maybe Helm fits well into a GitOps story is one of our benefits.
Yep.
Also.
Very much so. It can also be included in other competing Kubernetes-based configuration management tools. One of them being Kustomize. Kustomize is another tool for templating Kubernetes resources. You can actually deploy Helm charts using Kustomize and use some of the Kustomize primitives to inject values. So it really plays really well in the cloud native ecosystem because it allows you to not only make use of it as standalone, but also interject into all these different tools.
It plays well with others. I love that.
Exactly, the better together story.
I think so the other show we're doing, the Choose Your Own Adventure through the Cloud Native Landscape, we joke around about how it's a fight, but in many cases it's like, oh, you should just use these two together to do the thing. And I think so. Like Kustomize, we'll have a guest on for Kustomize for the show where you're coming to represent Helm.
Yep.
And I'm sure instead of fighting it out, you'll shake hands at least, maybe a hug.
Oh, we'll have a hug. Oh
yeah. So we have Kormaju, great learning today. Thank you both. Thank you so much for coming, Kormaju.
Thank you.
And then Epic Tralala says 2.6 can use Helm chart from OCI and mix it with Git values.
That's going to be for Argo CD. So he's referencing Argo CD version 2.6.
They are, yeah. Napalm said, need to show on persistent volume claims. This stuff makes my head spin a bit. I have how to add persistent storage to your Kubernetes application. It's like the 4th episode, maybe, Napalm, but one exists. Rick Oswalski was my mentor for that.
Oh, nice.
So we got it. Yeah, we did it. So I actually February 17th was my first show ever. So I'm coming right up on my 1-year anniversary of
Oh,
doing
wow.
the
Big
show, which is
milestone
pretty
coming up.
exciting. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. But I've kind of just been like following my curiosity, but I think I finally like honed it into a place where 1 year already. Fuel Snail has been here since the beginning. So is Napalm. They are all saved on the do you know what? I just put up my own personal YouTube page. So if you like YouTube / like at Wiggity Whitney, that'll have a playlist of all my Enlightning episodes there. Fuel Snowball says, how many whiteboards do you have at home? I assume you never clean them. I have I have like 30 of these piled up. It's just that the whole rest of my house is permanent markers are bust. I'm sorry, we just totally got sidetracked.
It's okay. That's okay.
But I don't remember what I was saying, but let's see. I'm gonna do what I like to do at the end of each episode, Andrew, is for me to do a recap, and then you can kind of verify that I'm understanding everything you've taught me correctly. I'm gonna zip up so you can read what's behind me.
Perfect.
So when Kubernetes first started, everything was YAML, and it was difficult to manage all the Kubernetes resources and how they were meant to relate together as one application. So Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes, so that for one resource, all those Kubernetes resources are grouped together for one application, or whatever reason. It doesn't have to be an application, you pointed out. So we mentioned some other package managers from other frameworks like Brew, Choco, Yum, apt-get, etc., pip, npm. And then one thing it can do is install the Kubernetes resources in a particular order too.
Yep.
So what is in a Helm chart? So the Helm chart is a primitive, as you would say, right, of Helm. And a Helm chart itself is a directory. And so we talked about the bare minimum of what's needed in this directory to make it work. So inside a directory, the Helm chart directory itself, you have a directory of templated Kubernetes resources. So these are these are Golang based. They use a Sprig framework to encapsulate functions. And so with these Kubernetes resources, you can create reusable functions so that these templates are dynamic and they're reusable. So specifically, we can use the template to include information about the release dynamically. So it could be looking that up on the fly. It can be using information about values on the fly, which is another thing we haven't talked about yet in the Helm chart. Yep. There's a YAML values.yaml file. It can do capabilities as part of the dynamic configuration, which is when you inject information about the Kubernetes cluster you're deploying to. Yep. And then you can do just like arbitrary files as part of the dynamic capabilities, where you might want to reference if you're a Java user or a Spring user or application.properties file, for example. Yep. So back to our Helm chart. So we have a directory of templates, which is how we're defining our Kubernetes resources dynamically and with logic. We're including values for those templated resources in a values.yaml, and then we're including a metadata chart. So you use the Helm CLI is the big way to interact with Helm, although you did later mention something else that I didn't write down.
Yeah, it's basically you can use the SDK.
The SDK.
Yeah. And that's all the other tools like Flux and Argo, and we talked about some of the other managers like OpenShift Web Console, the VMware Tanzu, you name it. All interact with the SDK.
Okay.
And you hit in it. We talked once again about Tiller, that was just mentioned by Napalm, which was in version 2, which was that server side component that caused a lot of challenges from a security standpoint, because you had a centrally managed instance, and it became very difficult to be able to manage multiple in a multi-tenant scenario. So by getting rid of that, you've not only increased the security, but you've also reduced the complexity.
Win and win. So you make a Helm chart. If you're using Helm to deploy or to define is a better word, your application, you create a Helm chart with at least those three things, and other things are possible.
Yep.
And then you use the Helm CLI as your main way to interact with Helm, and you do a Helm install command and install your Helm charts, and that creates the running Kubernetes resources. And
Yep.
that actual instance of running the application from a Helm chart, that itself is called a Helm release.
Yep.
You can upgrade your Helm chart when you have updates that you want to do. You can roll back a Helm chart. You can uninstall a Helm chart. Which would you say? Upgrade a Helm release, roll back a Helm release, uninstall a Helm release, or a chart? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how you interact with you define and interact with an application, but then it's likely that you're going to want to share this application with others. So they can now easily use the application you've given without having to understand the complexity of how it all gets installed together. And so you can share your package, you can package it up, it gets compressed into an artifact, and then it goes into you have an index.yaml, which is metadata of all of the charts in the Helm repository. And that's how a Helm repository gets shared. So if you want to consume from a Helm repository, you do it in these three handy dandy commands. You add repo and then put in the URL of the repo. You can search the repo if you need to, and then you can install the charts from the repo. And then there's new, less than a year old GA technology where Helm charts now can be OCI artifacts, and so they can be stored and managed in OCI compliant artifact repositories or registries. So that's new, and the community seems excited about that.
Very.
Helm also fits really well into a GitOps story. So both Flux and Argo CD support Helm, and Flux additionally, you can leverage a Helm lookups function where you can look up values in your Kubernetes cluster to help make more full-featured templates when you're defining your application. We talked about a couple other little handy-dandy benefits. Our values.yaml file can have a JSON schema, so that helps with validation, so you can't put the totally wrong values in there. You can only put slightly wrong values in there.
Exactly.
And then Helm works well with the CI pipeline or with continuous integration. There's a chart tester tool in the Helm ecosystem, so you can use that to lint and to test your charts. There's a chart releaser tool in the Helm ecosystem, which can package a chart and release it in GitHub pages. So the packaging steps, there are fewer of them, and then it goes to GitHub pages. So the overall benefits of Helm, it encapsulates all the necessary Kubernetes resources into one unit, and the logic of like what order you need to apply them in, or where they're pulling values from. All of that can be abstracted away from the end user. It adds dynamic capabilities and parameterization, which I guess I just said. And then you can share and receive charts from other people easily. Helm's been around for a while, so it has an amazing ecosystem. It fits into a GitOps story, and it works well with other Kubernetes technologies generally. So Kubernetes Customize, was an example of that.
Yep.
Do you think did we get everything?
You got a lot here. We did a lot in an hour and 52 minutes.
We really did, and it was a blast, and cool. I had so much fun. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Any final words? You're probably anxious to get to sleep, huh?
It's only 1:55. We're fine.
You're like, I can't even sleep after this. I'm having too much fun. Yeah.
Honestly, thanks everyone for coming out today. I had a blast. Thank you, Whitney. Happy to come back and really enjoy Helm. Helm makes working with Kubernetes a heck of a lot easier. And if you are interested in contributing to it, we want you on the Helm project to contribute. Even if you just provide input, go look at GitHub issues. Go ahead and contribute anything you want. Just collaborate. We have weekly meetings. Unfortunately, we actually our session today was over our weekly meeting. It is weekly on Thursdays at 12:30 for 30 minutes, 12:30 Eastern time every Thursday.
So, well, if you do want to get involved, is going to get Helm's GitHub and looking at the issues the best way? Is finding Helm on Slack? What's the best way?
A number of ways. You can go ahead and go to the Helm website, which has an entire contributor guide that you can go look there. You can look on GitHub.
Okay.
We are also on the Kubernetes Slack in primarily 2 channels: Helm-users and Helm-dev if you're a developer.
And we do have a question about contributing.
Yes.
Napalm is asking is it written in Go? They're looking
It is.
for
It is written in Go.
Oh, there you go.
There
you go. Yes. So, you said you've watched other episodes. I don't know if you've watched to the bitter ends, but the way we like to end things around here is by playing some music and dancing it out. So we're gonna have a little 2 a.m. You see, wave your arms a little. Yeah, we got this. We got this. There we go. Yeah, bring it. You're doing your driving move. You're home. Yeah.
We're steering the ship. Steering the ship.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone.